Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Gridiron Review. I'm Pete Medhurst alongside Bill Wagner. During the big program, we'll talk college football with Maryland and Navy, the pros with the Redskins and the Ravens, and we'll talk high school football, of course, and that's how we lead off as always. And Bill, the more the seasons change, we flip the calendar, the more things stay the same. Nothing more evident than this past week. Chesapeake coming off a big win against Meade, gets throttled by Arundel. Arundel throws for 350. Larry Barnes runs for over 100 yards. Old Mill, South River playing with huge confidence after beating Broadneck and then getting the week 2 win over Severna Park. Old Mill diffuses that momentum quickly. The more things change, the more they stay the same, at least in the upper echelon of Anne Arundel County football teams. And with Annapolis knocking on the door, Broadneck quickly diffused their flame as well.
Well, Billy Watts, a big game for Broadneck. That picture on the front of the Capitol on Saturday is tremendous. He's laying out full extension for a touchdown pass. He's going to cross the goal line as he lands. You can see in the photo. Great performance by him, hooking up with Emmett Davis on a big night of throwing the ball, and that was a tough loss for Annapolis. They've been making some progress, and that was a slight setback. And then big game, first real big passing performance for Dante Washington, the Arundel quarterback. Yep. Threw for 380 or something of that nature. A first real big game, and you can see if he can produce the passing numbers that Arundel's capable of, along with Larry Barnes' running, that's going to be formidable. Kind of a surprise, Chesapeake, nice win over Meade the week before, and then I was a little surprised that Chesapeake got routed by that type of score.
48-8. I think what we're finding out is Meade just doesn't have the same credentials as they've had the last couple of years. They were life and death to beat North County by a score of 19-12. Jeremy Washington ran for one and threw for one in that game for the Mustangs. But going back to Chris Watts from Broadneck, 53-yard touchdown pass from Emmett Davis, 35-yard touchdown pass, and then, we can give him the ball too. 63-yard touchdown run, ran for 78 overall. Great multi-dimensional weapon for the Bruins. And let's face it, they, especially offensively, replacing a lot of critical parts. Kanan Giebely gone at the quarterback, Emmett Davis having to step in, Chris Watts having to step in for Alec Rudin, who's moved on to Bryant University now at the FCS level. So the more this season goes along, the better that Broadneck offense is going to get. And that was scary what they did to Annapolis, because the Panthers had really put up some good production the first 2 weeks of the season. Broadneck really throttled them down this past week in rather easy fashion in the second half. It was a tight game in the first half at 17-8 at one point, but Broadneck pulled away for the victory. And I think Rob Harris's team is the one that's going to continue to get better. But we're finding out is the battle for that last spot. That South River win over Broadneck right now is looming huge.
Right, it is.
In the grand scheme of things, because we're only getting 3 teams in. North Point's going to clearly be the 4th team this year in the 4A East race. But that South River win over Broadneck is looming large right now for the Bruins and the Seahawks, seemingly the 2 teams that will battle for that last playoff spot.
Right, and then how about Old Mill really putting it to South River? You think South River was making progress. They were undefeated, had that big win over Broadneck, and then got put back in their place in a big way by Old Mill, which, and the other thing we see with these results is the Arundel, Old Mill, and Broadneck defenses all showed very well, held their opponents all to single digits.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Old Mill winning 41-6. Pete Boone with a couple of runs. David Morocco with a couple of runs as well for the Patriots. And again, we talk about continuity and things of that nature, but when you have guys like Chuck Markowitz and you have guys like a Chad McCormick,
and Rob Harris,
and Rob Harris, who's been in the program. He was assistant before taking over as the head coach. It means an awful lot with these teams, and that's why they consistently get results out there. Ryan Austin, big game for Northeast this week, 146 on 20 carries, winning touchdown with 1:56 to go. He had 3 overall to outduel Zach Neufeld of Southern. It seemed as if those two were having the mano-a-mano back and forth battle in that contest, and a big win for Northeast. They win by a score of 19-14 over Southern on Friday night. Severna Park, Trevor Bellotti scores the only touchdown for the Falcons in a 7-6 win over Glen Burnie. Private school, St. Mary's bounces back nicely after the Spalding game. 3-1 now. They beat public school Delmar from Delaware, smallest school in the state of Delaware, and St. Mary's edges them 27-25. And how about Evan Fockman from Spalding? Right. All he does is step in and put up numbers, and you had a chance to talk to some of the Spalding coaches. Very high on him as he threw for 181 and 3 scores, and a big win over Riverdale Baptist, 47-7.
Well, and Spalding's been running kind of that spread attack with a lot of option principles, and the quarterback, as we remember, Zach Avey, who's now at the Naval Academy, was more of a running quarterback. Fockman can run the ball, but what I found out from talking to the Spalding coaches when I saw him the other night was he's a much better passer than maybe even they gave him credit for. Made a couple really nice throws. They're very high on Evan Fockman.
Yeah, you beat Riverdale Baptist. Hasn't been bad the last couple of years.
No, that's a good win.
And that's a nice win, 47-7. St. Stephen's over Severn by a score of 30-0. And DJ Golat continues to put up some numbers here for AACS. Billy went 14 of 17, 187 in a score as they throttled Mount Carmel.
And Mount Carmel had been undefeated.
Yeah.
I don't know who they were playing, but it looks like AACS has an opportunity to be the class of that conference.
Big one coming up this week. It's Rundle. It's Old Mill. It's a shame you and I are going to East Hartford, Connecticut this week, because that would be a fun game to watch on Friday night. But it is only week 4, I think, of the high school season.
This game will be a big one. This
is one of those games should be like week 9 or week 10. Let's shuffle the schedule around. You and I need to get in that office with Clayton Culp, and we need to redo this schedule because it's pretty clear who's beating up on who right now in high school football. When we come back, we'll talk colleges. Big win for Navy and a nice bounce back by the Maryland Terrapins. We'll talk about that when we come back on the Gridiron Review. Time to talk colleges now. Navy knocks off East Carolina 45-21. Bill and I were both there in Annapolis to watch the midshipmen. 2 runners over 100 yards with Keenan Reynolds scoring 5 touchdowns. Chris Swain, the Swain train continuing to flow. He and the Walkersville native Quentin Ezel at that fullback position, Bill, really establishing a physical presence at that position. More importantly, Navy's offensive line. In week 1 against an FCS team, you expect them to dominate. Yesterday, East Carolina, 2 nose guards, 315 each. Navy really pounded them at the point of attack from the get-go.
Well, it was just a terrific performance by the triple option, and East Carolina just has not been able to figure out this triple option. In 4 straight meetings, they just cannot stop Navy on the ground. Keenan Reynolds, a terrific performance. He is well on his way to becoming the all-time leading touchdown scorer in all of
events. Knock
on wood. Barring injury.
Don't want him to get hurt.
Right. So he's 7 shy now of being the most rushing touchdowns, and I think about 12 shy of total touchdowns. Monte Ball of Wisconsin holding both of those marks. It was a terrific performance, and as you mentioned, this bodes well because normally the Navy offensive line takes a few games to develop chemistry. Looks like they've got it already, and the defense is playing well. Opportunistic, making some plays, getting some turnovers when it really matters, some stops when it really matters. First American Athletic Conference win for Navy. That was the debut game in the Lou League for the Mids, and a great way to start.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Youngsters playing well on that defensive side. You knew what you had in Will Anthony, but Amos Mason getting his first full-time playing time with the Mids. He had a strip sack that Anthony recovered. Mids eventually scored off of that to kind of put the game away. So getting those young guys on the field and getting that defense, Dale Pearson, guy that's been there forever, longer than just about anybody. And I had a chance to talk with him, the former Broadneck Bruin, Preston Pearson, his son now on that staff with Navy and the football offices as well. I know he's excited about having that opportunity, and they've just done an amazing job with that defense the first couple of weeks, considering how things were thrown at them with Coach Green's health on the defensive side. 7
first-time starters. I mean, really 7 players on that defense who have not played a lot. One of them is Micah Thomas, who led Navy in tackling against East Carolina. So they got some young talent that is showing through and looking pretty good.
Randy Etzel, I thought, made a mistake, and I know he had to start Perry Hills. There's no doubt Perry Hills is probably, in terms of skill, the least talented of the quarterbacks at Maryland. But he earned the opportunity by beating those other guys out. Caleb Rowe and Dax Garman just didn't play good enough. Well, Rowe had a wild game in his first start this week against South Florida. Terps easily win at 35-17. Rowe throwing for nearly 300 yards, 4 scores, and 3 interceptions in the contest. But at least now you feel like the Maryland offense has a little bit more of a pulse than just giving it to Brandon Ross and Wes Brown the entire football game. Yesterday, they were actually able to be multidimensional, get some explosive plays in the passing game.
I think what Rowe gives you is a downfield passing threat, which Perry Hills really did not give you. The Jacob brothers showed up. Tavon and Laverne, both big days for the Terrapins. They're speedsters, and you want to be able to utilize that type of speed. DJ Moore is a freshman wide receiver they really like, but with Rowe, you're going to have to live with the interceptions, I believe. I think he is kind of a gunslinger mentality. He throws it downfield, and when you do that, there's going to be some big plays, but there's also going to be some picks, and 3 picks in games in the Big Ten is probably going to cost you the game. So they're going to have to get him to limit the turnovers somehow, to know when to make the big play and when not to throw it down the middle of the field when it's really not there.
Big test this week with West Virginia on the road.
First
road game of the season, and I think it's in some ways it's a must-win because you look at the Big Ten, some tough clubs remaining on that schedule. Michigan's not the same team they were a year ago. They're not going to be a pushover by any consequence when they come to College Park now under Jim Harbaugh. So I think this is a huge game for Maryland to get to 3-1 this week.
Absolutely, and West Virginia it's a traditional rival. It's kind of going back and forth as to who's the better team. West Virginia had a nice little run there for a few years, and Maryland got them up in Baltimore with a big victory at M&T Bank Stadium. But yeah, absolutely huge game as you move into your Big Ten schedule because you got to prove to yourself that you can beat a quality opponent before you start the conference. And just curiously, the American Athletic Conference is trying to get wins that show their ability against the Power Five. Well, AAC school went and beat Bowling Green, which had thumped Maryland this past week.
Yeah, Memphis winning by a score of 44-41. So big win there for Justin Fuente's team. That AAC West with Navy, Houston, Memphis, SMU, who has played some solid football for about half and maybe part of the third quarter with TCU and Baylor. They're going to get better as this season goes along. That West has got some pretty good depth in it. By the way, that Navy-UConn game did not have a time on it. It is a 12 o'clock start. That's not good news for you, Bill.
I spoke to Mike Oresco, the commissioner for the American Athletic Conference, was at the Navy-East Carolina game and met with the media in the press box. And that's what he's talking about. These non-conference games are where the AAC has to show what they can do. Houston beating Louisville of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Temple with the big victory over Penn State of the Big Ten. These games speak volumes for the American Athletic Conference. And as we talked about, Bowling Green goes to Maryland and beats them handily, and then Memphis turns around and beats Bowling Green. And Mike Oresco's asking, what do we got to do to get a team ranked? Temple receiving votes, Houston receiving votes. Memphis is 3-0 and has won 10 straight games and has 1 vote in the AP poll that just was released.
And what was huge last night for all of these teams was BYU lost to UCLA. So now Boise State has a loss, BYU has a loss. So now you could argue your 3 best teams of the non-Power 5 now are Memphis, Houston, and Navy. And those 3, and they could eventually find themselves at least getting into that party and heading maybe out to the Fiesta Bowl. Finally,
Bowl.
Something positive to talk about with the Redskins. We'll do that when we come back on the Gridiron Review. Welcome back. Matt Jones, get to know the name because you're going to love his game. The Redskins running back alongside Alfred Morris, a 2-prong attack, Wags, as they ran the ball down the Rams' throat with the great Aaron Donald, who was the NFC Defensive Player of the Week. No doubt Jones going to be the NFC, if not the NFL Rookie of the Week, over 100 yards, couple of scores. Redskins with a nice win over the Rams, who had just beaten Seattle 24-10. Ironically, the Rams now in the game following the Seattle game. 2-16.
Wow, that really says something. How about a few years ago, the Rams came to Washington and Jeff Fisher sent out the 6 players that they got in the Robert Griffin trade for the coin toss. Was kind of a rub in your nose. So I know that Jay Gruden, there is a little extra motivation for the Redskins. When's the last time we saw the Redskins really play this complete of a game against a good opponent? Rams are a good opponent.
Probably since the Dallas game last year when Colt McCoy won at Dallas on Monday night.
Right. But Pete Tappy, because Matt Jones is on his fantasy team, by the way. You didn't expect that kind of production out of him. He really gave you a heck of an effort.
20-team league. You got to play somebody.
But it's a nice little tandem they have because Albert Morris is kind of a between the tackles, a very physical runner, and Jones has got that extra gear. There's a couple times today when he just, really shot through the hole with a tremendous acceleration.
And their defense is playing well, too. I mean, They went out and invested in the defense. Deshaun Goldson in the secondary went out and brought in Terrence Knighton up front on that defensive line. That's made Jason Hatcher even better.
Absolutely.
They've really, really picked it up front on defense because last year they were not a good defensive team by any stretch of the imagination. And, with Tony Romo breaking his clavicle, the Eagles struggling early, the Redskins have a chance to go to the Giants on Thursday night with a win. And really early in the first quarter of this schedule, taking control of the division. It would be really neat to see for those of us who've voted for the Redskins for a long time.
Jordan Reed is looking like if he can stay healthy, is a really good tight end in this league.
He's got to stop holding. He's getting called for holding calls both weeks.
But he makes plays in the passing game.
He does.
And then if they get Deshaun Jackson back to complement Pierre Garçon, I mean, this chance to be a pretty good offense.
I'll tell you what, they got more weapons than the Ravens. Even though Joe Flacco did play well for the most part this past week, making use of the weapons that he has. Folks, it's not 2001 anymore. We continue to anoint the Ravens as this great defensive team, and they're not.
Well, the Raiders proved that today.
Yes. By the Raiders in a huge way. They could not get to Derek Carr. He picked them apart the entire day. And let's face it, the Raiders not a strong running team, so they're throwing the football. Dean Pease had no answers whatsoever for anything the Raiders were doing on Sunday, and they pulled it out in the final minute after the Ravens had taken the lead on the Justin Tucker field goal.
Right, you give it 37-33. You give up almost 40 points to the Oakland Raiders. From the very beginning of the game, Jimmy Smith, who's supposed to be one of the best cornerbacks in the league, he'll tell you that if you ask him, he got torched by a rookie, Amari Cooper, out of Alabama, for about a 67-yard touchdown, and it was like that the whole way. Joe Flacco and company kept trying to keep the Ravens in the game, and the defense continued to allow Oakland to score. Big trouble on the defensive side of the ball for the Ravens. This is a absolute alarm clock of a loss to wake up the management. So they're going to have to make some changes here.
I don't know what you can do, though. I mean, you got to have personnel. I don't know who you're going to pick up right now that's going to help you at this point. You got to go to the dance with who you brung, and if they can't dance, you're going to be sitting on the sidelines.
As you mentioned, Pete, they didn't get any pressure on Derek Carr today. That's where it all starts. I don't think the Ravens secondary is all that great to begin with. And when you leave,
it's not. Outside of Jimmy Smith, there's nobody in the Ravens secondary that you and Will Hill to a certain extent, yes, but the other corner, Ladarius Webb is nowhere near the player he was before the injury.
Shell of himself.
Not come back from that very well. So
and mediocre safeties.
You know what I think hurt them? Believe it or not. I think, and I know they'll talk it down, but they stayed out west, went out to San Jose. They've been gone for 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a long time to be away.
You're out of your regular routine, and I think that does have a little bit to do with it. I would be very interested to see how they respond. They're playing a Cincinnati team that's 2-0, that has 2 decent wins here to start. They crushed the Raiders in Oakland last week and then beat San Diego this week. So I think the Bengals provide a very interesting opponent. The Ravens could be staring at 0-3 if they don't beat the Bengals at home in their home opener next week.
And that would have the fan base absolutely up in arms.
Apoplectic. Purple and black.
Absolutely.
Not this year. It's bad colors. Purple and black, you like that?
I'm not going to answer that question.
Our cameraman's wearing a purple
purple
right. Ravens shirt right now.
Yep.
I just want to rip off my shirt and show you like Hulk Hogan. I got a Redskins emblem or something like that, but I don't. But again, next week for the Ravens, it's a big one. They got to play Cincinnati in their home opener. They could be staring at 0-3. Redskins play Thursday night this week against the Giants. That'll do it for our show this week. As always, we appreciate you making the time for us. Bill and I will be headed to East Hartford, Connecticut this week for Navy and UConn Saturday at noon. Of course, Bill will have the recap for you in the Sunday edition of the Capital, and of course online at capitalgazette.com. That'll do it for our show this week. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week right here on a Gridiron Review.